The night over the Great Plains was dark and moonless, but the air remained taut as a bowstring. By the fire at the edge of the camp, the old shaman Ketowa whispered a prayer to the wind spirits, staring into the flickering embers. His voice was weak, but each word sounded like an echo of ancient knowledge. He fell silent when he heard the crunch of dry grass, a light but sure step. She was coming toward him. Lilita Wanata, daughter of the great Sioux chief, wore no feathers or jewelry. Her face, stern and beautiful, was wrapped in a deer cloak, and her hair was in two tightly braided braids. In her eyes burned a light of thought, but not of fear. She had a choice to make, a choice on which depended not only her future, but the honor of her family, the blood of her ancestors, and the ground she had trodden since childhood. The context of events was clear. Fort after fort was being built in the east, and roads were being built through the lands of the forefathers. The U.S. Army, officially at peace with the tribe, continued to send troops deep into the territory, citing the safety of the settlers. Among these soldiers was a man unlike any other. His name was James Alderson. He was a junior lieutenant in Fort Kihawa's cavalry unit. His eyes were clear. He spoke little but carefully. He didn't let his comrades burn parking lots, didn't shoot without reason, and knew how to pronounce the names of the elders correctly. They had met by chance, in the shadow of the cliffs at the foot of the White River, when Lilita had descended alone to fill a water bulk. James emerged from the shrubbery with his hands up, dropping his rifle, but no words. Only a look. And that silence, which pierced the girl's soul, was the beginning of her doubts. Chief Tanasa Wapitu, her father, was a man of honor, but also a warrior. He knew that peace with the whites was only a postponement. Each year there were more of them, and behind each promise was a new fence, a new road, a new cross on the map. He would not allow his daughter to set foot on another man's path. But Lilita's heart had already taken the first step. The plot began in the morning when a messenger from the west arrived at the parking lot. His face was covered with dust, his clothes bloody. He brought news of an attack on a nomadic Lakota settlement. Old men had been shot, women kidnapped, supplies burned. Soldiers from Fort Kihawa were supposedly escorting the convoy, but for some reason had retreated hours before the raid. At a meeting of the elders, Tanasa spoke firmly. "They will not protect us. We need to defend the land ourselves." Lilita's eyes met her father's, and she lowered her gaze. Developments followed quickly. That same evening, slipping away from the camp, she went to James. He was waiting for her as if he knew. They talked until dawn. He told her how his mother had died of fever in Ohio, how he couldn't bear to see the fire in the soldiers' eyes when they shot bison for fun. He held out a map to her and whispered, "There's an old trail to the south, over the ridge. If you ever want to go, you'll find me at the Sandhills cabin." She made no promise, only put her palm to his cheek, then walked away into the darkness. The climax of this part came unexpectedly. The following morning, the tribe's parking lot was greeted by men in blue uniforms. Under a white flag, representatives of the Laramie County government arrived. With them were two officers. One of them was James Alderson. His face was stony, his gaze gave away no emotion. Tanasa stepped forward, and the official speech went on. "By treaty on the 19th day of the month of fall, the United States government has the right to—" Lilita stood back. She knew that every word, every "has the right," was a noose around the throat of the people. The denouement came in the evening, when only those closest to them were gathered in the tent. Tanasa turned to his daughter for the first time in many days. "Have you heard? We must go to the Black Hills, but there is someone who brought the white men here. Someone told them where our camp is." The silence became a ringing. All eyes turned to Lilita. Her heart beat thunderously. She didn't betray, but she could feel the circle tightening. She didn't respond. There was no need to. The flames in the center of the tent swayed, and the wind rushing in from outside whispered to her, "Choose." The night on the plain stood still, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Black clouds floated over the prairie, full of heavy moisture, like harbingers of trouble. In the tribe's camp, the fires were extinguished, and the guards, armed with bows and spears, stood at the boundaries of the camp, tense as strings. After the morning visit of the American representatives, confidence had vanished, and anxiety had settled in hearts like ash after a fire. In the shade of a tent surrounded by ancient totems, Lilita sat alone, not uttering a word to her father after the accusation. Her silence was like a sentence. While suspicion grew within the people, events outside the camp began to unfold faster than the elders had predicted. A burned caravan was found in the northwest, not far from Sparrow Pass Creek. The bodies lying there, shot through with rifles, belonged to St. Joseph traders who carried flour and cloth for exchange with the tribes. But from the tracks, the trampled grass, the scraps of weapons, the shape of the footprints, we could tell these were not Indians. Someone had wanted to set them up by deliberately leaving a few items known as Lakota paraphernalia, an arrowhead, a horn amulet, a fragment of a ceremonial cloak. It was all too obvious. Officers from the Territorial Department arrived at Fort Kihawa immediately. Henry Westmore, the fort's assistant commandant, proposed to act quickly. He insisted on a military expedition and the temporary detention of several tribes for investigation. Lieutenant James Alderson objected. He spoke of provocation, asked for time, but was removed from his current duties and sent to the garrison barracks on the formal pretext of disobeying an order. In the meantime, the Tanasa camp began to assemble a council. The chiefs of neighboring clans were invited secretly, through messengers who crossed the plains at night. It was like the old days, when people gathered before great battles or when threatened with exile. Among those who arrived were the wise Kanateo of the Blackfeet tribe and the young but eager Itasapa, a Lakota warrior who had lost a brother in one of the white hunters' raids. Their talk was loud, their faces stern. Among them, Lilita felt superfluous. Her presence didn't command respect like it used to, but she didn't care. A different fire was boiling inside her. She hadn't slept for 3 nights in a row. With each passing hour, the feeling grew in her that events were out of control, that both sides were no longer looking for a way out, just an excuse. She couldn't talk to James. He'd disappeared after the visit, but there was still the map in her bag, under her cloak, and the memory that he hadn't lied at the creek. At the height of the 4th night, she left the camp again. It was impossible to penetrate the fort. The guards had been beefed up on the approaches, the sentries changed every hour, and even the surrounding farmers reported anything suspicious. But among the hunters feeding by the roadside, she met an old merchant named Silas Jeremy, who had done business with her grandfather many years before. He recognized her by her face and agreed to pass her a note. A short one. No names, no words of love. Just instructions: if alive, find the trail by the dry tree by Gibbs Creek before the next full moon. At dawn, a crow flew over the parking lot. It was a bad omen. That same day, a messenger arrived with a message. 10 detachments of cavalry are assembling east of Black Rock. Under the pretense of securing peace, the convoying of Indians to specially designated lands, the southern reservations, has begun. When the council met again, for the first time Tanasa did not raise his voice. He knew that resistance would lead to massacres, submission would lead to the disappearance of the people. Then he looked at his daughter and said, "If you can stop it, do it. I will not stand in the way, but do not think that love will scorch the blood from the earth." The words were not a permission, but they were not a prohibition either. She took them as a final blessing. From that point on, events began to unfold rapidly. Lilitha traveled south toward Gibbs Creek. She walked alone, hiding from patrols, through thickets and dangers. Along the way she was harassed not only by people but by wolves, lack of water, heat, and storms. She ate roots and dried meat she'd taken from the camp. But when she reached a lone dry tree 4 days later, she realized she was not alone. The footprints were fresh. In the morning, he appeared next to the tree. tired, in a tattered uniform, but alive. James. They didn't speak. They embraced, like two men with nothing but the present ahead of them. He brought news, orders to move at dawn, to direct the main attack on Tennis's camp. It had to be quick, with minimal casualties, but no one would be spared. They knew time was short. They had to figure out how to stop the slaughter. Twilight fell over the plain like a warm blanket. The air was stale and still, with the odor of dust and bitter grass and something subtly new, as if the earth itself were holding its breath before a decisive step. At the foot of the hill, in a narrow hollow, silence pulsed. There, in the shelter between the rocks, Lilita and James had found shelter for a few hours. Perhaps the last that nature would give them before the storm came. Not the one from the sky. A storm of men, bullets, decisions, and inevitable loss. They sat, sheltered beneath a shrunken deerskin tent once used by Lakota hunters. The wind ruffled the edges of the tent, as if to remind them that time was passing. But no one was talking about time now. Only hands warm, tired, trembling found each other in the semi-darkness. He didn't look at her with pity, and that was more important than 1,000 words. James, weathered, with scratched cheeks and blood on his forehead, still looked calm. He held her hand as one would hold something alive, fragile but strong, not as property, but as a gift, and she allowed herself for the first time to be not the daughter of a chief, not the symbol of a people, not the bearer of a tribe's honor, but simply a woman. A woman afraid of losing the one who had become her fire. "When you look like that," he whispered, "I begin to believe that everything can still be stopped." She didn't respond with words. Instead, gently ran her palm over his cheek, as if memorizing the features, as if she couldn't believe she could see them again. Their lips met tentatively, as if for the first time. It wasn't passion in the ashes, it wasn't escapism, but a quiet, restrained fire that smoldered beneath his skin without seeking a flame. They didn't need promises, they didn't need language to feel that in those touches was all life. Outside, lightning flashed across the sky. The branches of the trees stirred, as if they were alive. Lilita drew back, listening sharply. Her instincts, trained from childhood, told her that someone was coming. James stood up, pulling his hunting knife from his belt. There was a faint rustle in the bushes, and a moment later, a man emerged from the shadows, a young tribesman named Tahiun. He was wounded in the shoulder, and his eyes were full of terror. Out, already out. 4 dozen horsemen. They're coming over the pass. They don't expect resistance. The chief of the Tennis refuses to leave. He says, "Let the land take us all, if the spirits choose." James turned pale. Lilita grabbed the map, opened it on the nearest stump. "They'll go through Spirit Gorge. It's narrow there. If we get there faster, we can stop them. But we need a reason. An official one, a decree, an order, a testimony." "I have the report," James said. "A copy of the order that says an attack is only authorized if there's aggression from the tribe. It's in the fort, under lock and key, in my drawer." Pause. They both realized what it meant. He must return to the lair of those who already considered him a traitor. That night was the decisive night. The wounded Tahiun remained hidden in the cave, and the two of them, James and Lilita, set off again, this time into the very mouth of the beast. To the fort. For a document that could save dozens of lives. It was a long way. Over slopes, through ravines, along old animal trails. They walked almost in silence. Only at times did James give her a hand, supporting her, and she squeezed his fingers tightly. In such moments, everything seemed simple. Peace, war, honor, blood all were in the shadows when they were just there. At dawn, they reached the edge of the forest. Fort Kiewa could be seen in the distance, grim as a cage where the mind was locked. The gate was guarded by 2 sentries, but James had a plan. He knew the shifts, knew where to climb through the hole in the south wall near the warehouse. That's what he'd done a year ago, when he'd hidden notes about officer misconduct. Back then, he still believed the protocols were fair. He snuck inside, leaving Lolita in hiding. She waited. An hour was like a day. Anxiety clutched her heart like an eagle's talons. But then she saw him slip out of the building, holding a rolled-up bag under his shirt. Everything was almost quiet. Almost. They were spotted. One of the guards shouted something, and the first bullet flew at them. Lolita grabbed his arm, and they fled. Across the ravine, through the thicket, over thorns and dust. She could hear James screaming in pain. He'd been caught in the thigh, but he didn't stop. They fell into the creek and stood still while the chase, unable to find a trail, moved back. He was shaking from blood loss. She pulled out a knife, cut open his clothes, made a tourniquet. His breathing became ragged, but he smiled as he looked at her. "You're stronger than war," he whispered. With the document in her hands and her wounded lover on her shoulders, she returned to the cave. The storm in the sky was beginning to thicken, but the real one was already inside. Lolita walked on, unable to feel her feet. James's blood was still hot beneath her fingers, and behind her was not just the chase, but the dying world she had belonged to since birth. By the time she reached the cave, the sun was already high, and its rays were falling on the face of Tahuna, sleeping with a knife in his hand. He flinched when she entered, but knew instantly when he looked at her, haggard, with black soot under his eyes and a crumpled scroll in his hand. "He's alive?" he exhaled. Lolita nodded. James groaned, not from the pain, but from the heat rising with the wound. The bullet had gone in deep. She had no gunpowder to cauterize it, no strong alcohols, not even a witch doctor. The tribe was gone. Into the gorge. Those who remained were too weak or too old to flee. There were no more than 3 dozen of them, hidden in abandoned hunting trails and lairs among the rocks. She knew there was no time. In a few hours, the soldiers would enter Spirit Gorge. She has the decree. In her hands, a document that could force the commander to halt the advance. But the mere fact that she, a woman, also an Indian, will appear with him will accomplish nothing. She's nobody to them, nobody but a target. "You must speak for him," Tahun said, leaning over to the injured James. His voice was strained. "Let the commander see. The white man wrote it himself, ordered it himself. Your job is not to get into an argument. You have to get his signature, tell them about the mission he was talking about. They'll believe paper faster than a live man." Lolita knew what that meant. Forgery, albeit for salvific purposes, could cost her life. But there was only one choice. While Tahun readied the horses, she stayed with James. He was delirious, calling out to his brother, asking him to stop firing, calling out coordinates she didn't understand. But suddenly he froze, as if he'd heard her heart. His eyes opened. Helplessly but clearly he whispered, "You are not alone. Don't forget who you are. Even if they don't accept, you're still above them, because you didn't betray." She pressed her cheek against him. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. "You can't now." It was about 3 hours on horseback to the fort, over hills where every path could be mined by anger and prejudice. Lolita rode fast, holding the map in her left hand and the scroll in her right, hiding it under her cloak. Dry earth crunched beneath her hooves. Crows flew overhead, heralds of trouble. At the fort there were already prepared detachments. 8 dozen soldiers, with saddles wrapped in skins and machine guns shrouded in covers. She knew what this meant, not just a march, but a sweep, the kind that would leave no bones, no traces. She dismounted, and immediately she was met with cold, indifferent, wary stares. One of the officers, with an eagle nose and dusty uniform, stepped forward. "Who are you?" She handed the scroll over silently. Crumpled, blood-stained, it seemed worthless. But the officer's gaze changed. He unfolded it, ran his eyes over it, and froze. His face stretched. "Who gave you this?" "Lieutenant James Rowling, your subordinate." He's wounded. He sent me. He said, you have no right to attack unless there's been an attack. That's what the report said. He served you, and he didn't betray you, and you are betraying him. There was a pause. The soldiers exchanged glances. Some grinned. Someone put a hand on the butt of the gun. But the officer didn't move. He knew the signature was real. He knew orders changed, but this document was certified above his authority. And if he violated it, there would be a trial, not a fight. We're waiting for confirmation from HQ. For now, stop. One step into the gorge and you're shot. Lilita nodded. She understood. This was a victory as fragile as ice on a spring river. They could wait 24 hours. Or 2. But the tribe will not wait. They will see the riders on the horizon and think it's over. They will fight, and blood will still be shed. She came back. James was delirious, his fever rising. Tahoon was catching lizards, not for food, but to distract the children who were hiding in distant holes. He said, they don't understand what death is. They only feel that everything is wrong. The next morning, everyone who was left came out to the gorge, not with guns, but with open palms. Men with paint on their faces, women with their arms bare, children with grass cloaks. It was a gesture of peace, not of weakness, of honor. He who can fight but chooses dialogue is stronger than any warrior. There were soldiers standing on the pass, silent, guns drawn. No one fired a shot. It was a pause, the one in which history is decided. And in that pause, a shot rang out. One. From where, it was not clear. But the blood fell to the ground again. A boy of about 10, Lahi, the son of the hunter who had died the day before, fell into the grass. His mother screamed, rushed forward. The soldiers froze. It was a moment that could not have been predicted. No document or speech could stop him. Only one man. James. He stood, holding his shoulder where the blood still flowed, and screamed, loudly, so loud that even the birds in the sky flinched. He was walking towards them, with a document in one hand and an oath in the other. He said, if you fire another shot, I'll take your name to headquarters myself. Your generals have already received a telegram with a report. No rank or order will save you, because this was peace, and you chose death, but it's not yours. He collapsed when he reached the center of the clearing. The soldiers were silent. The commander got down from his horse, slowly, unarmed. He approached the boy, took off his cap, then to James. He said, you sold yourself for this land? James smiled. I sold myself for honor and love, and we don't seem to be judged for that here. Lilita stood nearby. Tahoon held the boy in his arms. The gorge shook, but not from gunfire, from breathing, a living one. There was a silence over the spirit gorge, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Not a leaf stirred, not a bird sang. Even the wind avoided these places, as if it dared not breach the boundary between lives sacrificed and a future that had not yet decided if it would happen. James lay on a roughly made bed of deerskin in the deepest cave, where neither sound nor sunlight could reach him. Lilita sat beside him, changing the bandages on his chest. The blood had stopped, but the fever held. His lips were dry, but there was the same stubborn flame in his eyes as the day they had first met by the river. There were still people standing outside. The soldiers had not left, and the Iroquois had not returned to the village. The world was a shaky, taut thread between the abysses. A step to the side and it would all come crashing down. Tahoon went to the elders. He knew he could not speak for the people without their consent. Even Lilita, the daughter of the chief, had no right to do so. Not after she had disobeyed orders and helped an outsider. She heard one of the elders, Yonako, gray-haired, with a face mottled with deep creases, say, let him come to the river, we'll decide there. If she is truly between two worlds, let her prove it on earth that she belongs to no one. Lilita knew what it meant. An old tradition, the ritual of the fire between worlds. It was performed only once in a generation. The participant had to make a sacrifice, not of blood, but of truth, to reveal his essence to those who judge not with words, but with spirit. If the spirit of the ancestors rejects, exile. If it accepts, trust. But no woman has passed it in the last 2 generations. As the sun stood overhead, Lilita walked to the river. Everyone was there, people and strangers alike. An officer in a dusty uniform stood at a distance. He didn't interfere, but he ordered his men, "Don't shoot," even if the ritual seemed savage. He understood that the laws were different here. The river was dark. The water was as cold as winter. Lilita entered without flinching. She held 2 objects in her hands: her father's hunting knife and James's pendant, the one with the prayer engraved on it. One symbolized her past, the other symbolized the future. She sank to her knees, looking into the water. Her voice sounded calm above the surface, but there was a fire inside. "I am a daughter of fire and earth. I was born among the forests, but my blood is no longer only Iroquoian. I love the enemy of my people, but I have betrayed neither him nor you. I have brought you truth. I brought you peace. If you reject me, I will leave. If you accept, I will stay, but not as a chief's daughter, not as a soldier's wife, as a man who stands in the middle, not choosing sides, but building a bridge." The elders were silent. Tahun stood in the circle, not intervening. He knew his time to speak had passed. Yonako stepped forward. He beckoned, and an old woman approached her. She wrapped a rope of dry vine around Lilita. This was the final step, the spirit flame. If the fire lit on the water burns, the spirits will accept. If it went out, they would reject it. They lit the wick. The flame flared up. It wavered for a few seconds as the wind tried to blow it out, but it did not disappear. It embraced the dry vine, traveled upward, and when it reached Lilita's chest, it did not burn her, though the heat was palpable. She did not cry out. She just looked ahead, to where the slope began and where James was looking at her, pale, standing with difficulty, but coming. He staggered toward the river. His steps were like a challenge to fate. He shouldn't have gotten up. He couldn't, but he did. And the moment the flame turned blue, the sign of supreme acceptance, he fell to his knees beside her. "I don't know if you'll accept it, but I already have. I gave her my life. She didn't take it. She saved it, and not just mine." Yonako bowed. He placed a sign, a red falcon feather, on the ground. It was an ancient assent. Acceptance. Lilita was no longer just part of the tribe. She had become a symbol of the alliance. But there was no celebration. Tahun was already walking, clutching a bloody sheet in his hands. "This is from headquarters. The order has been cancelled. The commander has been removed. All offensive actions are halted. But there is a new order, to put all those who participated in the resistance under the tribunal, and Lilita is among them." The officer was silent. His face darkened. He knew he would not follow orders, but he also knew that if he didn't, he would be replaced. In 2 days, another unit would arrive here. No questions asked. That evening, under a dark sky where there were no stars, Lilita and James stood in the ravine. She held his hand, feeling how weak he still was, but not broken. She knew they would not be allowed to stay. Here, where their love was born, there would be no place for them anymore, but the fire in their hearts still burned. And that fire could be a road, albeit a dangerous one. Night covered the forests like a shroud. The full moon reflected in the water, turning the river into a silver snake that slid between the hills and rocks, taking in the scent of blood, smoke, and earth. Everything around them was too quiet. Even the beasts, whose growls usually blocked out the night's darkness, froze in anticipation. The spirit gorge was no longer breathing. Lilita stood at the edge of the slope, by the waterfall from which, according to legend, the spirits of the tribe departed to the other world. Behind her, the people, the past, the history. Ahead, the unknown. But also beside her was James, wounded, stubborn, alive. He was on his feet again. It was almost a miracle, if you didn't count willpower for a miracle. He couldn't walk, his chest still ached, his eyes were cloudy, but he said, "I won't let you go alone. We've been walking apart for too long." Their escape had to be quiet. No sound, no footsteps, only the wind among the rocks. But the world, even dying, didn't want to let go without a reminder. Torches flared behind the trees. Someone was coming. Not soldiers, not men in uniform. It was the Mohawks, young warriors, those who disagreed with the decision of the elders. They carried weapons made of stone and wood, but with a rage in their hearts that would be enough for 1,000 rifles. To them, the treachery of Lolita was not washed away by the flames of ritual, nor by the pen of Yonako. They went not for judgment, for vengeance. Tahiyon appeared between them like a ghost. He stood between his sister and the tribe. His words were short. "Whoever sheds blood here will be banished forever." But there was no fear in their eyes. One of the warriors stepped forward. He was younger than Tahiyon, but his blood boiled more than his mind. He threw his spear. James took a step to the side. Without thinking, without a plan, the spear slammed into the tree, missed. But it was a sign there was no turning back. The chiefs accepted, but the people did not. Then Tahiyon took out a knife and slashed his palm. The blood dripped to the ground. He held it out to the sky, then to the warriors. "I am not for her. I am for honor. You kill her. You kill her father's name. You kill a soldier, you kill yourself, for he is not an enemy. He came to be a shield. You will be the ones who break the oath of your ancestors." They stopped, one by one. The blood on Tahiyon's hand was a sign of strength. Even those who hated knew that to break the word of the man who had given blood was to deny themselves. One of the warriors spat on the ground, then turned away. The others left after him, slowly, like a river running into the ground. The gorge grew quieter again, but there was no time left. A military group was due to arrive in the valley in the morning. Not an officer, not a missionary, not a peacekeeper, an army. No questions asked, no rituals, no decisions of the elders, those who swept away both houses and nations as if they were autumn leaves. There was only one way, over the pass. A road that had not been traveled for years. There were rock slides, raging torrents, wild beasts. But it led to the northern territories, to lands where the government had not yet established forts, where mixed communities, former settlers, Canadian Métis, and tribes that had not signed treaties lived. There it was possible to disappear or start over. And off they went. Lolita, in her leather cloak, her hair tangled and her eyes reflecting the fires of the past. James, weak but determined, leaning on a staff carved by her hand. They didn't speak. Neither of them did. Words are unnecessary when love is not a promise but an action, when instead of a vow, it's a journey together. The days changed into nights. One day they came to an old hut at the foot of the hill. Its walls were covered with moss. Its roof was sagging, but the chimney was still standing. There they stopped. Foreign land, but the air was different. No one was chasing, no one searched, no one else knew who they were. Rare traders came here. Sometimes tribes, sometimes fugitives. Lolita welcomed them, treated them, fed them, listened to their stories in silence. James mended nets, planted corn, built a fence. They did not name themselves. Names no longer mattered. They had silence. And the baby that was born 1 year later. He was neither white nor red. He was the first, the one born out of the two fires. They called him Kahentio, the one who carries the good earth. One day in spring, when the snow had not yet completely melted, an old man came to their hut. In his eyes was the fire of the fire that once burned by the river. Yonako. He said nothing, only handed over a bundle, a stone feather, a symbol, a legend, a link. "You haven't forgotten who you are," was all he whispered to Lilita, and left. And everything got quiet again. And in the evening, as the baby slept in the hide by the hearth, James sat down beside Lilita. He took her hand, the very one that had once kept him from death. She looked up at him, infinity in her eyes. "You still think we're between worlds?" he asked. She did not answer at once. Then she said, "No, we are not between. We have made our own world." And that was it. There was no victory. There was no defeat, just a fire that kept burning, somewhere between the past and the future, somewhere where the story was just beginning.